that communities often fracture themselves into somewhat distinct lines, you see it a lot on Reddit and other forum-type sites. Because of the up and down vote capability, if a certain type of person congregates in a community, it's quick to drive others away. People get burnt in the flame wars. Oftentimes those fractures heal. Oftentimes they do not. You would think with the way art typically operates, fan spaces would therefore be less bigoted. I haven't actually found that to be the case. Fandom is and always has been home to vicious infighting. As I've said before, I think sometimes the passion extremely aggressive fans have for art and artists really is just a pretext for what they really actually enjoy: fighting. When you love fighting, when you view the takedown as the most important thing, sometimes you excuse the use of bigotry. Anytime I've played a game or read a manga that has queer undertones and go Googling about that, I inevitably end up on a Reddit or Game FAQs thread. When it's Reddit, there's about a 50% chance the thread is an actual conversation, a 25% chance either way of it being purely supportive or purely vitriolic. I have never personally clicked on a Game FAQs thread about queerness that did not make me immediately regret ever picking up a video game in my life. There can be this insistence, especially when a game doesn't have a flat-out wedding or gay sex scene, that any reading of gay or trans themes in a work is forcing those themes onto other people. It is incorrect. This is the result of a couple of things. First of all, bigotry. Second, a self-conscious rejection of the idea that your takeaways are not always factual and not the only takeaways. And three, a misunderstanding of what textual analysis actually is. So I'm sure this is not going to upset any of those people. But Genshin Impact is a very queer game. First wish. The game. Breath of the Wild... Genshin Impact is an action role-playing game from Chinese gaming giant Mihoyo, or Hoyoverse, or Cognosphere, or whatever of the company's names that it's had throughout the years that you want to use. In this open world of anime art, you play as one of two twins, Lumine or Aether, outsiders who travel from world to world. They get trapped in Teyvat, and whichever twin you choose goes on a mission to find their sibling, regain their lost power, and restart their journey to a new world. Teyvat is populated by humans, gods, dragons, monsters, and creatures made out of the elements. Speaking of elements, the magics of the world are based around those elements. So your magic options in the game, you've got fire, water, earth, air, electricity, ice, and plant. Or pyro, hydro, geo, animo, electro, cryo, and dendro. As you travel throughout the world, you gain the ability to use magic in whatever element governs the country that you enter. And each of those governing elements has a god who uses it, one of the 7 archons. Throughout your journey, you're brought into the political struggles between 4 groups, mostly. You have your normal, everyday people and their governments. You have the Fatui, aka the Russian KGB, Celestia, which are like the Sky God Illuminati, and the Abyss Order, led by your sibling. What? As of recording, the game's story is not complete yet. We're close to being done with Fontaine. Then we've got Natlin, Shaznia, Celestia, and Conria. You get a new country unlocked about every year or so it'll be about maybe 2028, potentially even 2030, depending on how things go. Genshin Impact is a cross-platform game that's free to play with optional in-game purchases. Those purchases normally get you Primogems, the in-game currency that then lets you buy wishes. Wishes are how you get new characters and weapons. So ultimately, it is a gacha game. You know, like one of those dispensaries at like a bowling alley where you put in a coin or two, 25 to 50 cents, and you try to get those sticky hands that your parents really hated, and you would splat against all the windows and would eventually get just coated in grime and dust and gunk and be disgusting. That is Genshin Impact. There are plenty of criticisms out there about gacha games, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today. I would suggest, though, that you do go do some reading about gachas and whether or not they should maybe be counted as gambling games that might injure people. A lot of people in the Genshin community complain about the limitations the game has to impose on itself due to running on mobile alongside all of the other platforms. I personally do play it on my phone. It takes up an insane amount of memory space. I probably honestly need to switch over to my computer. I hate PC gaming. I've been playing it pretty much ever since 1.1, where you first meet Scaramouche, the most demon of demon twinks. My current mains are Nouvellette, Lenny, and the Wanderer. I've named him Evanes. Previous mains include Alhaitham, Tainari, Ayato, and Kazuha. I've cleared the 12th floor of Abyss exactly one time, hard. It's a fun game. It is an addicting game. It's a frustrating game. And it is an interesting game in its politics. Second wish. Gender. When a game gives you the option to play as either gender, there's always a question as to whether or not they're going to be separate characters or entirely, or basically the same person in a different font. The choice between Lumine and Aether firmly falls into that second category. The differences in the narrative and the interactions you have with the other characters are cosmetic. I've never seen a moment where the game refers to Aether's maleness. So what does that say? Well, regardless of the intentions of the developer or the makers of the game, it's clear from the meta that gender doesn't really matter. Reminder, when you're querying a piece of media, you're not saying that this is the only way to read. It's an examination of how gender and sexuality are presented in non-typical cis-heteronormative ways. This is a way of reading the text. So to say gender is fundamentally unimportant flies in the face of typical cis-normative beliefs. In fact, showing that gender is basically a cosmetic choice, one meant only to envelop how best you want to live and feel good in the world, is inherently a sort of pro-trans narrative choice. That's really the meta here. It's not a destroy gender position either, though, because that is the choice that you are given here. It is saying, if the world has an unimportant binary, which would you like to be? Who are you? There isn't necessarily non-binary Well, actually, we'll get to it. Think of cat girls. I know. Again, we'll get to it. Following the passage of a sexist, anti-sex, and homophobic set of media censorship standards in China, Genshin released outfits for many of its characters, updated in order to cover up skin or remove a certain femininity from some male characters. So let's look at some of the character designs and talk about them in context of so-called traditional masculinity. Aether, our main playable character dude, has a little crop top that's showing off his belly. He also has incredibly long blonde hair. In a Western context, it does add a layer of stereotypical femininity, which is something you have to ponder over given the game's immense popularity in the West. Aether is pretty much a masculine femboy. That he could be the protagonist of a massively popular action video game in the United States? There's something there. That's very Link, Legend of Zelda of him. When I first started writing this, I put in a statement about Aether's hair not necessarily being gendered feminine in China due to depictions I've seen of long-haired Chinese heroes, but to put a caveat on that, those were in historical pieces. I'm going to talk about China's reactionary social policies later, but their picture of masculinity, from what I understand, in the contemporary is much the same as the West. It's the soldier, muscular, stiff, short-haired, buzzed hair, and strong-browed. And there are big, muscular, soldier-coded men in the game. None of them are playable characters. The majority of Genshin's playable males could be called bi-shonens. Nikolai Svetku says of this beautiful man character type, "They're a young man whose beauty transcends the boundary of sex. Some have theorized that bi-shonen provides a non-traditional outlet for gender relations. Moreover, it breaks down stereotypes surrounding affect characters." The cutesy anime art style of Genshin finds its male character design roots in a movement that specifically defies typical cis-hetero binaries. So back to Aether. He's a long-haired, alien femboy creature who wears a crop top. He's not the only one in love with showing a little tum-tum. You've got Bennett, Baiju, and Goro. All of them show off their bellies. Sino and Razor do as well, but in a less feminine feeling way. Perhaps being shirtless is coded masculine, whereas specifically showing off your belly and only your belly is coded feminine, at least in the West in the context I've grown up in. Goro also does drag, kind of. He answers columns as Miss Hina. There are cardboard cutouts of this character Goro plays as at the direction of the mischievous fox Yaimiko. This is played for laughs because haha, man in a dress, isn't that so funny? But it also kind of plays into his character. Goro is timid socially, so it's hard for him to say no to things like this, but he's also inspiring. He's hardworking. He wants to make people's lives better, and he's kind of easy to manipulate in that regard. He protects and helps people as a general on the battlefield, and he also helps people as a woman in a newspaper. With Goro, we're shown that gender does not change the core of who you are. No matter the circumstances of Goro's birth, he would still be aiming his purpose at helping people and giving them advice. Plant goddess Nahida, our Dendro Archon, is able to project her mind into other people within Sumero and lightly control them for a brief period of time. Possession as a concept in fiction is inherently an exploration of what the self is. Is the self the body? Is it the mind? Is it a combination? Is it your memories? Is it your past experiences? Or it's something more idealistic than that, something more abstract, like the soul. When she possesses a male character, she is still Nahida. Her body does not dictate her identity, except when she's pretending to be said person. In that case, gender very much becomes performance. Hello, Judith Butler. Nahida, who is not male, puts on a male costume, a skin suit, and performs male identity. Two of the characters I play a lot in the game are I, the electricity goddess, and Wanderer, aka Scaramouche, an ex-Fatui member and semi-god figure. The Wanderer is a puppet-like, robot-like creation of I. He was originally meant to be a body to house her bodiless mind and soul, while she worked on her concept of eternity, the plane of Eurythmia. Things didn't really pan out that way, and the Wanderer slowly became his own person. But what if things had turned out differently? Well, when you eventually enter the inner plane of the robot I uses, you see her actual form, which is the same as the puppet. So, was the puppet modeled after her, or did she model her inner form off of the puppet? It's the first one, but still. If the Wanderer housed her, would she prefer to take on his form? Or would she exist in this, her normal form, inside of him? When presenting as the Electro Archon, would Scaramouche present as male or as female? Would they claim his body was one or the other? Scaramouche doesn't ultimately work out as a host. It's possible to interpret that failure as a statement that a woman living in a man's body would not work out. that gender dysphoria would not be healthy. I would have to present as a version of her true self, which is why she lands on the robot she does. Their backstory then is trans in nature. No conversation about gender in Genshin Impact can be complete without talking about lovable drunkard Venti, Animo Archon. Venti is originally a wind spirit. When he ascended to godhood, he took on his current form, modeled after a dead friend. Did Venti originally identify as male? Were the friend a woman, would he just as easily have adopted that form? Venti, the wind spirit, exists as an entity that can apparently constitute his body however he wants. His choice then to present as a guy, a femboy specifically, is a choice, and we have to remember that. When China doled out its new archaic rules about gender portrayal, a character they mention as being a problem specifically is Venti. According to Jade King over at The Gamer, he's a young, boyish character who some might easily confuse for a girl purely because he doesn't abide by cliched conventions we associate with the male body type. His non-conforming to traditional masculinity is pointed out by the Chinese government. The characters from Fontaine are eventually revealed to not be true humans, but rather water spirits called Oceanids in human form. According to the Genshin Wiki, Oceanids are technically a genderless race who have been shown as females. But these human Oceanids present as both male and female. In this way, gender isn't innate to the soul like some evangelicals like to make you think. It's expression and style. It gets assigned and can change. Now you might be thinking, if it's going to speak to the trans experience, does it have anything at all to say about dun 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 pronouns? In Fontaine, we actually get introduced to these cute creatures called melazines. The head of Fontaine, Nouvellette, says, "Melazines are to be addressed using she, her pronouns, never the impersonal it, its. That was my personal contribution." That wasn't an impression, by the way. I don't do those. Through the melazines, we see the impact that using personal pronouns can have. The right ones bring an acknowledgement of someone's humanity. Use of the wrong ones is a denial of humanity. It can be used as an excuse to then do violence. You also see something interesting in the Adepti, these godlike creatures in Liyue. Several of the Adepti speak in reflexive pronouns. That's the "one does not think oneself bound to answer" type of stuff. In the English dub, Paimon also continuously uses her own name in place of pronouns. It's kind of similar to the reflexive pronouns of the Adepti, but it comes across as more like a neo-pronoun. Speaking of, if you're also terminally online, the its moment with the melazines may bring to mind for you annoying discourse about that as a neo-pronoun. Is it wrong to dehumanize someone who wants you to dehumanize them? Is it wrong to force someone to dehumanize you when they're not comfortable with that? One thing you see a lot of in Genshin Impact is animal people, Nekomimi types, cat girls. So let's dash into dangerous waters, hope we're in Fontaine instead of anywhere else so that we do not drown, and talk about xenogenders. Non-binary writer Maverick Lumen identifies with various xenogenders and says of them that they illustrate and express an aspect of a person's experience of their gender identity or expression. These can be aesthetics, concepts, animals, plants, fantastical beings, archetypal, and more. Taimi, the dating app, says on their website, xenogender includes all non-binary gender identities that cannot be related to standard forms of human genders or gender categorizations. It can be used to describe more complex gendered feelings. So, like the bun self types. Have you seen the stereotype of the trans cat girl? A cat girl is a type of girl, yes, but it signifies something more specific gender-wise. ContraPoint says in her video on Twilight, gender expression is not just aesthetic, it's style. And style is more than aesthetic. It's a way of doing things. I was first introduced to Nekomimi, the cat people, through the manga Loveless by Yun Koga. Cat boys, by which I mean adult men who wear cat ears, are very cute. Like, oh, yes please. There are numerous characters in Genshin Impact with animal body parts, specifically ears, horns, and tails. Those are the most common things. While this is typically relayed as a racial thing in-game, race in Genshin is a different topic. Polluted by people who think criticizing a game's colorism is evil. So let's think about it as gender. Bear with me. Yaimiko has fox ears. She's a trickster. If you consider her in light of xenogenders, the fox girl shows a specific identification with mischievousness. Yanfei has characteristics of Jishi, a Chinese mythical creature of justice. The idea of justice is central to her identity as a character. Personality and animal identification become important to these people's identities. I actually think this is a better way to view the characters with animal features than viewing that as a racial thing. Viewed through race, as the text literally presents it, brings about a certain racist biological essentialism. Your race determines who you are. And that's gross. There's no way around that. You can read it that way. I'm choosing not to. Instead, I see it as a further expression of gender and interiority. Third wish. Flirting time. Let's keep thinking about Nekomimi type characters. In an examination of Loveless, T.A. Noonan said, "Just as the Western figure of the Playboy bunny juxtaposes the vulnerability of a baby animal with unbridled female sexuality, the Nekomimi clothes fetish objects in the garb of innocence," which, is coincidentally the review all of my boyfriends have left me. Now, technically, the only cat boy I can recall in the game is Diona's non-playable character father, Draf, and I think there's an ancestor of theirs too. In their book Animation and Cartoon, Nikolai Svetku says, "Rebellious boys are more often compared to dogs." And we do have several dog boys in the game. Sino wears a dog cap reminiscent of both the Egyptian god Anubis and the fetish gear pup hoods. Tainari is a fennec fox, a type of canine. He's sort of rebellious in that he brushes off his superiors when he finds them annoying, but otherwise, the only other true dog boy is Goro, our cross-dressing, crop-wearing, easy-to-trick, cute puppy. He's rebellious too, literally. Svetku continues, "Bi-shonen cat boys are typically associated with shoujo and yaoi. While none of these characters are cat boys, pup boys is an entire gay subculture that is a very different conversation." Beyond the animal characters, the beautiful boy art style itself finds origins in queer sexuality. As Svetku says, the aesthetic of the bi-shonen began as an ideal of a young homosexual lover, likely arising from the effeminate male actors who played female characters in kabuki theater. Theater? Where all the gender play comes from. Ha ha ha, you're welcome. One of the things that we hit on in the gendered section of the video is the choice of player character. The gender of the traveler also plays into gay coding. There are several characters who flirt with the traveler throughout their journey. Lisa and Kaya heavily lean into flirtation from pretty much the start of the game, though the latter is mostly part of his information gathering style. And it doesn't matter if you're Aether or Lumine, you still get flirted with, and you still go out on your date with Ayaka. Rampo from Bungo Stray Heizo still flirts with you on your hangout. Through making the traveler's gender not matter with how the characters interact with you, we make the sexuality of those interacting characters, at least when they're being sincere, of some sort of non-heterosexuality. The traveler, like many role-playing game protagonists, especially anime-styled ones, is seen in fan spaces as the center of a harem. Aether specifically is shown as the harem master. Among a lot of guys in the fandom, he is of course surrounded by waifus. Perhaps because of his lightly feminine coding and short stature, he's also often surrounded by husbandos. That dating sim element is intentional. That the fan-formed harems can be of any gender because everyone flirts with a traveler, well, that's also baked into the DNA of the game. One of the secretaries of Ningguang goes on and on about the beauty of Ningguang's form. As Plato and Catholics would say, beauty is the desire of love. For Plato, that's romantic love. The ultimate yearning becomes for philosophy, the height of beauty. Though before that, it seeks out the beauty of the human form. For Catholics, beauty is the physical form of God's love and creation on earth. They get really weird about it. Baishi, the secretary, talks about Ningguang's breathtaking beauty as she's stepping out of the bath. Oh, what in the Saltburn? Take from that what you want. YouTuber E has a bunch of videos on gay subtext in Genshin Impact. She dives into popular ships and explain where the subtext comes from, with a hard focus on the Beidou Ningguang pairing. Why does fandom ship these people? Here's why, she says. I sincerely suggest watching her videos to get details on some specific couplings. I only watched the first one, but I'll probably watch the rest of them after I put this video out. So you've got Ningguang Beidou, Alhaitham Kaveh, Chongyun and Zincho, Kazuha and his dead buddy. One thing I want to specifically think about is the Sino-Tainari relationship. Isn't it great that they also kind of rhyme in the first syllable? The two dog boys are quite close to each other, and their animal coding automatically gives them a sort of queer coding, but they're also opposites in a lot of ways. Sino is the more typical anime dog boy, the pinnacle of heavy masculine rebellion. He is the lone wolf. Tainari is an intellectual, a teacher, a nurse. While he has his own rebellious tendencies, Tainari is best understood as a nurturer. Whereas Sino's animalness is through fetish gear, Tainari's is natural. Tainari's being more natural is also a stronger symbol of gender bending and sexuality. Together with Kale, they form a sort of family unit. They raised and protected the young girl after they got her out of Mondstadt. And the stereotypes of parenting, Tainari exhibits a lot of stereotypes of the mother. Mentoring, intelligent, emotionally intelligent, inherently cuddly. Sino, meanwhile, is a version of the ideal stereotypical father. Stoic, strong, filled with terrible jokes that the mother type hates. Emphasis on the sigh of Sino. Their family unit is presented with stereotypical gender roles, only without the gender variation outside of Tainari's animal characteristics. It is therefore queer-coded. Role-playing games are often fantasy escape, and I know that's an obvious point to make. Don't bite me in the comics. But it's also important for thinking about the appeal of these types of games and the decisions that go into them. Yes, the art is cute. Yes, the story can be compelling. But you also get to live the fantasy of protecting people, of being important, of saving the world, of doing something. In this world, you are capable of facing the scary things. You can survive the scary things. You can win. And you can be praised. The point of so many characters flirting with the mostly silent traveler is to let the player fantasize about being desired. As ContraPoint says, desire is desire for desire. We want to be loved. In games with harems or harem elements, where you can play as a male or a female, and picking which one doesn't really necessarily limit who's going to flirt with you, there exists a sub-fantasy of desire playing out. You are not merely chased by important people of the opposite gender, not merely by the people you're attracted to. You are so attractive and helpful and charismatic that everyone of every type would love to love you. We all know the stereotype of the straight guy who responds, "Just don't hit on me," when his gay friend comes out to him. That response can be homophobic in nature, it can be a joke, but I think it also hides an actual want. They want their friend to view them as attractive, as a potential boyfriend somewhere out there in the multiverse. Anecdotally, comfortable straight guys love flirting with gay dudes, and we like it too. It's fun. It's easy to say that mutual partnership is ego-stroking, but I think there's something more there. It's a confirmation of your worthiness of love and desirability without any of the risks of possible romantic connection. There's no heartbreak coming, so there's all of the reward with little to no risk. There is safety in flirting with someone who can never be with you for whatever reason. So when you think of harem elements, where all genders desire the protagonist, it isn't merely fulfilling the desirability fantasy of queer audiences. It also plays into the wants of straight players. You want to be so desirable that anyone might love you. We want to be loved. Desire is also often for lack. We yearn for that which we are not. Think of Plato's story of humans once being ball-like creatures. 4 legs, 4 arms, 2 faces. Some balls were homosexual and some were heterosexual. The gods split us down the middle, and that led to love. We desire the part of us that we no longer have. With Sainari, we see similarity in chemistry, sure, but we also find one who is lacking that which the other has. Sino is a melee fighter, and Tainari is an archer. The distant desires the close. Beidou is the rough vagrant on the seas. Ningguang is the distant sophisticate floating in a palace in the sky. We yearn for that which we are not, and so wish to consume. 4th wish. Why it matters. Consumption. So, video game addiction. Is it real? Well, first you have to ask, are behavioral addictions psychiatric facts? You might be quick to say, well, yes. The instinct for a lot of people is to then list off gambling, porn, and sex addictions. Those are real, so it makes sense for video game addiction to be a real thing. Well, the science actually isn't there yet. Really, only one of those 4 is currently called an addiction, and that would be gambling. There's heavy argument over the other 3. In fact, many professionals argue that labeling those things as addictions could easily be stigmatizing completely normal behaviors, an instinct to pathologize more and more. There are some on the evangelical side who would say someone who watches any amount of porn on a semi-regular basis is addicted. That's simply not what addiction is. Video game addiction isn't currently included in the DSM. Mark Zastrow examined the beliefs around supposed video game addiction for Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. There are some who believe it does exist, and others who believe the supposed disease is likely a symptom of other underlying mental health issues. The most commonly suggested mental health issue I saw in the article was a lack of impulse control. Some who think video game addiction does exist and is its own thing believe that it exists at vastly smaller numbers than people assume. To me, I do think it seems like an attempt to pathologize normal behavior in the vast majority of cases. There seems like a puritanical attempt to paint any pleasurable activity that's not necessarily productive work, if it's oft undertaken or even semi-regularly undertaken, as wrong. Ascetics. Self-denial is holy, anything else is a sin. And ascetics is bullshit. What concerns me is the attempt to turn medicalization into government restriction. Speaking of authoritarian governments, sorry to the tankies, China has decided, despite the lack of evidence, that video game addiction is not only real, but widespread and devastating amongst the youths. Right before they published draconian reactionary restrictions on the industry, a state-owned newspaper compared gaming to drug abuse. The actual lack of evidence so-called behavior addictions function the same as substance abuse, that withdrawal, is actually a large part of why they currently aren't accepted in the DSM. So there's that. But as a pretense to crack down on the industry and restrict the lives of its citizens, China has decided to pretend the evidence solidly backs this comparison. Now, of course, they have to pretend that. You have to make that comparison if you want to make your heavy restrictions, because otherwise you'd have to decide whether or not it's addiction based on individual extreme cases, where that is maybe an actual reality if it even exists, instead of treating it as a substance that can be restricted for its danger. In this paper, they talk about a supposedly addicted teen whose grades started to suffer. Gaming offered him a sense of achievement. His father smashed countless phones. In protest, the kid tried to off himself. The implication in the article is that this is the fault of the gaming, but no. The achievement comment implies an existing mental health condition, likely some sort of existential depression, that is not brought about by gaming. The father's abusive reaction is also more concerning. It's just simply bad parenting. Of course, China's entire reaction to gaming, as described in this article, is also just bad parenting. In extreme cases, teens are administered electroshock therapy to reduce their addiction to gaming. So, we're doing medical torture. You shouldn't be doing electroshock on kids because they like to play video games. Now you might be asking, what does that have to do with Genshin Impact? That was a tangent, buddy. Well, after pushing that nonsense, China, of course, had to pass actual regulations severely controlling the industry and restricting the lives of its citizens. Minors are now allowed exactly 3 hours of playtime a week, precisely from 8 to 9, Friday through Sunday. And yes, of course, that means most children won't be allowed to play any sort of video game at any point in time until they are an adult. Regardless, this isn't really about that nonsense idea of gaming addiction being so real you have to specify the exact time of day people are allowed to do a certain thing, as if the time of day decides whether or not something then develops into an addiction. But when they use that as a pretense to put out these restrictions, they also put in restrictions on content. You can't be corrupting the youths after all, not in their 3 hours a week. You can't be letting people think it's okay to be themselves. Remember when I said Venti was specifically pointed out as a problem character? That comes from this censorship measure. Effeminate men and queer love are both banned. As Jade King points out, the censorship in this massive, sexist, homophobic market could actually lead to a decrease in queer representation in general. Why risk cutting out the business you could get selling something to China? So, why does it matter if people can read queer narratives into Genshin? Queering has been how we found representation before we started to actually get to see ourselves. It's an important way to find evidence that we exist. It's also, in this case, a form of resistance. It's a huge middle finger to an oppressive, sexist, homophobic government. Gay and trans people exist, and we will continue to exist. Your desire to erase us ain't gonna work out. We will still see the traces of our beautiful existences wherever we so choose. Genshin Impact is a massively successful game that functions as a sort of soft power for China. By queering it, we are telling the CCP that they cannot export their bigotry. The world will continue to move past them, just like we eventually will every conservative moron. I talked about it briefly in my video on leftists who cried about bourgeois decadence when it comes to queer people simply existing and wanting rights, mostly just because, they're campus reactionaries who don't actually care about politics. But China shut down the Beijing LGBT Center, Shanghai Pride, and LGBT Rights Advocacy China. It is a homophobic government inspired by a deep sexism. Queering is also important in video game and anime spaces in general. Blue Flag is a manga by Kaido, published in Shonen Jump. One of the leads of the manga was a gay man with a crush on the main character. The story tells of the relationships the MC has with the girl he likes, his best friend who likes him, and the various people in their lives. There are entire chapters talking about homophobia and sexuality, and debating whether homophobes need to be respected and empathized with. They don't need to be respected in their homophobic beliefs, by the way. In the final chapter, there is a time leap. We are in the future. The character relationships have completely changed. We're all older, and as you get older, a lot of the times you grow apart and redefine how you relate with people. The main character doesn't actually end up with the girl that he was pursuing, but with the gay best friend whose feelings he didn't know how to handle throughout the rest of the story. I looked at comments on Manga Plus when I first finished the manga. There were a lot of angry reactions to the gay ending. It wasn't simply complaining about rushing things like many people have complained about now, but that it ended gay. And they didn't like that. And they kind of made it clear that they wouldn't have liked it even if there was a longer ending that built up to that relationship. A later manga in Shonen Jump, Excuse Me, Dentist, It's Touching Me? By Sho Yamazaki was pretty popular on the app. I read it as the chapters came out, and it's a fun little silly manga. The comments loved the comedy. I didn't see much of any homophobia or transphobia, really. Now, is that because the manga reading community online evolved so quick, or was it because queerness was presented as a joke rather than a drama? The couple also never explicitly got together. If they were, in the end, shown to be clearly in love as a man and a man, how would those people have reacted? I don't know. When Kwangxi has her lesbian pile, people were like, hell yeah, lesbians. But is that just the straight fetishization of lesbians? I'm not sure. But what I do know is that Reddit threads on manga and anime hate suggestions of queer ships and queer manga. Even in the relatively chill atmosphere of Welcome to Demon School or Rumakun, there's still occasional insistence that reading Asmodeus and Aruma as potential romantic love as an option in his harem is outside of the box. Oh, why can't people be friends? They yell, but that's only ever yelled when it comes to potential queer people. Now, I'm cognizant of the fact that sometimes this is just typical ship war nonsense. Here's a post about A and B. You dumb bitch, it's clearly A and C. A and B are just friends. They're practically brothers. You know how the internet is. It's half need for validation and half pretending to care about art or political issues when really just desiring a pretense to fight with other people. That dynamic is at play, I'm sure, but it's also always more prominent when it comes to queer themes. The anti-SJW types of the mid-2010s have not gone away, unfortunately. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I've seen threads on video game boards going apocalyptic over queer web and queering video games. Tales of Celestia, how dare you invade our spaces, they say. So queering doesn't only become an exercise in finding representation, seeing ourselves in worlds, going against oppressive governments. It isn't only an analytic style for examining potential readings about gender and sexuality. It becomes an act of resistance against homophobia and transphobia as concepts. It refuses to cede ground to bigotry. Video games are art, and there is no art space that exists without queer people. We are here to stay and create and read. Our stories are here to stay. Incels, Celestia, and China cannot stop us. As Pryor says at the end of Tony Kushner's Angels in America, we won't die secret deaths anymore. The world only spins forward. We will be citizens. The time has come. Bye now. You are fabulous creatures, each and every one, and I bless you more life. The great work begins. Also, hi! Like, comment, subscribe. Don't be mean to people in the comments. I don't like it when you're mean to people. Don't harass anyone ever. You can join me on Patreon, a thing that I started as a joke because I didn't have any subscribers, and I thought it would be really funny to never have anyone subscribe to my YouTube and then be running a Patreon and always be like, subscribe to the Patreon and having 0 views. The bit doesn't necessarily work when people are actually watching things, but I'm still tickled by the concept. Also, buy my poetry collection. It's on Amazon. It's called Butterfly Snuff. You can get it in hardback, paperback, and ebook. There's a special extra poem on the back cover of the hardback and paperback versions. Also, follow my musicals on social media. Hopefully you get to see them at a theater sometime soon. I write a lot of plays and musicals, and I'm pretty proud of them. Great. Whee! Dear Pluto, are you listening? Somewhere out there, bobbing in the dark sea, far from my reach. Do you wonder how the sun can keep shining through your distant misery? Dear Pluto, now I can see the life we lived, the friends we lost. They're all out of reach as you sleep in cold therapy. Dear Pluto, are the stars really real, or are they tears that you spill? Pluto, how do you do? Pluto, are they happy with you? Dear Pluto. Is sometimes just a for the motherland. Lumia is stronger symbol. Rainbow.